Walk through a 1940s garden in October, and you'd witness something modern gardeners have lost: purpose in every movement, intention behind every task. Families who lived through the Depression and rationing understood something we've forgotten. Fall wasn't the end of the garden. It was preparation, all rolled into a few crucial weeks of work. The secret techniques they relied on weren't written in books or taught in classes. They were passed down through demonstration and repetition. Today, we've traded them for convenience, but the methods still work, still produce, still make sense for anyone willing to learn them again. So, here are 20 fall garden secrets from the 1940s we've completely forgotten. Save the last harvest for seed. The final picking of the season wasn't eaten or preserved. It was examined with a critical eye. Each fruit or vegetable judged for qualities that mattered: size, vigor, disease resistance, and early or late ripening. The very best specimens were set aside, their seeds extracted, cleaned, and stored with care that bordered on reverence. It was practical breeding, a way of improving the garden year by year without spending a cent on purchased seed. A tomato that ripened 2 weeks before its neighbors, a bean that resisted rust when others fell to it. These were the parents of next year's crop. Seeds were thoroughly dried on plates or screens, then tucked into paper envelopes labeled with the date, variety, and any notes on performance. These envelopes went into tin boxes or glass jars, stored in cool, dark places where moisture and heat couldn't reach them. By spring, when catalogs arrived and neighbors made their orders, these families already had their seeds waiting, proven varieties that had earned their place through performance, not promises. Bury kitchen waste in trenches. Compost piles weren't universal in the 1940s, especially in urban victory gardens where space was tight and neighbors might complain about smell or appearance. Instead, kitchen waste went directly into trenches dug between rows or at bed ends. This method, called trench composting, was wonderfully efficient. After harvesting a row, a shallow trench was dug alongside, or where the next season's planting would go. Kitchen scraps, coffee grounds, vegetable peelings, eggshells, and anything organic found their way into these trenches throughout fall and winter. By spring, those trenches were filled with dark, rich earth, perfectly positioned to feed the roots of whatever was planted above them. The method required no maintenance, no turning, no careful balancing of green and brown materials. It just worked, transforming waste into fertility exactly where it was needed. Families who practiced trench composting rarely needed to buy fertilizers. Their gardens fed themselves on what the kitchen discarded. Plant garlic. Right after the first chill, garlic planting had a saying attached to it, passed between gardeners like a secret handshake: before the ground bites back. That first real cold snap, when morning frost stayed past sunrise and the soil started to firm up, that was garlic time. Not before, when warmth might trick cloves into premature sprouting, and not after, when frozen ground made planting impossible. Families would break apart the biggest, healthiest heads, selecting only the largest cloves for planting. Smaller cloves went to the kitchen. Each chosen clove was pushed into prepared beds, pointy end up, 3 inches deep, 6 inches apart. A layer of straw or leaves went on top, protecting against the worst cold while letting water and air through. By spring, those cloves would send up green shoots weeks before anything else, and by summer, heads twice the size of store-bought garlic would be ready for harvest. This fall planting created garlic that stored beautifully, lasting until the next crop came in, completing the cycle. Sow, spinach, and kale. Late most gardeners finished planting by August, but those who knew the old ways sowed certain greens in September or even early October. Spinach and kale seeds were an example. These late-sown crops had a strategy that seemed counterintuitive but worked beautifully. The seeds would germinate in the lingering warmth of early fall, sending up small plants that established good roots before winter arrived. Then, as temperatures dropped toward freezing, growth stopped entirely. The plants went dormant, sitting through the coldest months, looking dead but very much alive. Come late winter or early spring, when temperatures rose just slightly above freezing, these plants woke up and resumed growing, weeks or even months ahead of anything planted in spring. They had a head start no spring-sown crop could match, producing tender, sweet greens when fresh vegetables were desperately needed. This fall sowing was insurance, a way of ensuring early spring food, no matter how long winter lasted or how late spring arrived. Mix wood ash into garden beds. Every home with a wood stove or fireplace generated ashes through fall and winter, and none of it went to waste. As beds were cleared in October, buckets of ash were carried out and broadcast across the soil. Wood ash provided potassium, essential for root development and disease resistance. It also raised soil pH, counteracting the acidity caused by decomposing organic matter and certain fertilizers. Most vegetables preferred slightly acidic to neutral soil, and fall ash application ensured the pH would be correct by spring. The timing mattered. Applied in the fall, ash had months to integrate into the soil, mellowed by rain and freeze-thaw cycles. Spring application could be harsh on tender seedlings. Families knew which beds needed ash and which didn't. Heavy clay soils benefited from the ash's loosening effect. Too much ash could swing pH too far in the other direction, creating new problems. The goal was balance, and experienced gardeners developed an eye for how much each bed needed. Mulch with corn stalks and leaves. As fall progressed and garden plants finished producing, they weren't hauled to a burn pile or dump. They became next season's soil. Corn stalks, bean vines, tomato plants, and leaves from nearby trees were chopped or broken down and spread across the garden beds. This fall mulch served multiple purposes through winter. It protected soil from erosion, preventing precious topsoil from washing away during autumn rains and spring snowmelt. It insulated the ground, moderating temperature swings that could harm soil structure and kill beneficial organisms. As it decomposed, it added organic matter, improving soil texture and fertility. By spring, much of this mulch had broken down, ready to be turned into the soil or pushed aside for planting. What remained continued working as summer mulch, suppressing weeds and holding moisture. Families who mulched heavily in fall often found their spring preparation work was cut in half, the soil beneath that protective layer emerging soft, rich, and ready to plant with minimal additional effort. Plant a patch of winter rye or clover. Empty beds in fall were an opportunity, not a waste. As soon as a crop finished, those who understood soil health would plant cover crop seeds across the bare ground. Winter rye and crimson clover were favorites, chosen for their ability to germinate in cool soil and grow vigorously before hard freezes arrived. These cover crops did remarkable work through fall and winter. Their roots spread through the soil, creating channels that improved drainage and aeration. Winter rye's roots could penetrate compacted layers that vegetable roots couldn't reach, breaking up hardpan and bringing nutrients from deep layers to the surface. Clover, being a legume, actually pulled nitrogen from the air and fixed it in the soil, essentially manufacturing fertilizer for free. These plants also prevented erosion, their dense growth holding soil in place during storms. In spring, before planting time, the cover crops were cut down and either tilled into the soil as green manure or used as mulch. Either way, they added enormous amounts of organic matter. Dig deep and turn the soil. Before frost, before winter locked the ground, many gardeners performed a deep turning of their beds. This wasn't about planting preparation, it was about enlisting winter itself as a workforce. The soil was dug or forked deeply, turning it over to expose new surfaces. Clods were left rough and large, not broken down and smooth. When winter came with its cycles of freezing and thawing, those rough clods would break apart naturally, frost shattering them into fine particles that created perfect planting texture by spring. This process also exposed pests. Grubs, beetle larvae, and other overwintering insects that had burrowed into the soil for protection were brought to the surface, where cold would kill them or birds would find them. Weed seeds buried deep would be brought up, while surface seeds would be buried too deep to germinate. By spring, beds that had been roughly dug in fall would be soft and friable, ready to plant with nothing more than a light raking. Store root crops in barrels of sandroot cellars weren't always available, but the need to store carrots, beets, parsnips, and turnips through winter remained. The solution was simple: wooden barrels or large crocks filled with layers of sand and vegetables. The process was methodical. Clean, dry sand was placed in the bottom of the barrel a few inches deep. Roots were arranged on top, not touching each other, then covered with more sand. Another layer of vegetables, another layer of sand, continuing until the barrel was full or the crop was stored. The sand maintained perfect humidity around each root, preventing shriveling while not being wet enough to encourage rot. It also provided insulation and prevented ethylene buildup that could cause premature sprouting. These barrels were kept in the coolest part of the house, often a north-facing closet or unheated room. A properly maintained sand barrel could keep roots fresh until spring, providing crucial nutrition when stored foods were running low and fresh produce was unavailable. Leave cabbage and kale in the ground. While most crops were harvested before the hard winter freeze, cabbage and kale were often left standing in the garden well into winter. These cold-hardy brassicas actually improved with frost exposure. The freezing temperatures triggered a chemical change, converting starches to sugars as a natural antifreeze. The result was sweeter, more tender leaves and heads that tasted better than anything harvested before frost. The plants were sometimes mulched with straw for extra protection, or row covers were used during the worst cold. But many just stood in the garden, waiting to be harvested whenever needed. This living storage saved root cellar space and provided the freshest possible food during months when fresh meant something special. There were limits, of course. Eventually, deep cold or too many freeze-thaw cycles would damage even these hardy plants. But in most areas, cabbage and kale could stand from October through January, providing reliable food when little else was available. Can and pickle. Everything that couldn't be stored fall meant long days of processing food for winter, and nothing that grew went to waste. Tomatoes became sauce, paste, juice, and whole canned tomatoes. Cucumbers turned into pickles in every variety. Dills, sweets, bread and butter. Beans were canned in plain water or pickled with vinegar and spices. Corn was cut from cobs and canned or dried. Beets were pickled, as were eggs from chickens that laid heavily in the fall. Fruits became jams, jellies, and preserves. Every family had its own canning setup: large pots for water bath canning, pressure canners for low-acid foods, and tables covered with jars being filled, processed, and sealed. Those shelves of gleaming jars represented security, proof that winter could be faced without fear of hunger. Recipes were closely guarded, each family having their particular way of making dill pickles or tomato sauce that was superior to everyone else's. Children helped with peeling, chopping, and filling jars, learning the skills they'd need for their own households. Use cold frames made from old windows glass was never thrown away in the 1940s, especially old window sashes. These became cold frames, simple but effective structures that extended the growing season by weeks or months. A wooden box, often made from scrap lumber, was built directly on the ground or on raised beds. The back was taller than the front, creating a slope. The old window was hinged to the back or simply propped on top, creating a transparent lid. This basic setup captured solar heat during the day and held it through cold nights. Inside, lettuce, spinach, kale, and other greens could be started in the fall and harvested through early winter. In spring, seedlings got a protected start weeks before outdoor planting was possible. The cold frame required attention. On sunny days, even in winter, temperatures inside could soar, cooking the plants if the lid wasn't propped open. At night, especially during hard freezes, extra insulation like blankets or straw was piled on top. But this simple structure, built from materials that cost nothing, could produce fresh food during months when gardens were otherwise silent. Sprinkle lime on beds after harvest. After the last crops were pulled and the beds were cleared, bags of agricultural lime were brought out of storage. This white powder was broadcast across the soil, a fall ritual as regular as planting garlic or turning compost. Lime served specific purposes, making it valuable despite its cost. It raised soil pH, correcting acidity caused by decomposing organic matter, rain leaching, and the use of certain fertilizers. Most vegetables preferred slightly acidic to neutral soil, and annual lime applications kept pH in the right range. Lime also provided calcium, essential for preventing blossom end rot in tomatoes and proper cell wall development in all plants. The timing of the fall application was deliberate. Lime needs months to fully react with the soil and alter pH. Applied in fall, it had all winter to work, meaning the soil would be properly conditioned by spring planting time. Fall application also avoided the risk of burning tender plant roots, a problem with fresh lime applied near growing crops. Families knew which beds needed lime and which didn't. Let chickens loose in the garden. Once the last vegetables were harvested and beds were cleared, the chicken coop door swung open and the flock descended on the garden. This wasn't random. It was planned pest control, fertilization, and tillage, all accomplished by birds who worked for nothing but the bugs and seeds they found. Chickens scratched through the soil, hunting grubs, beetle larvae, and overwintering pests. Their busy feet broke up clods and incorporated surface debris. Their droppings added nitrogen-rich fertilizer exactly where it was needed. Within days, a small flock could work through an entire garden, leaving it cleaner and richer than any human could manage alone. Some families built movable pens, called chicken tractors, and shifted them across the garden over weeks, ensuring thorough coverage without allowing the birds to overscratch any one area. Others just opened the gate and let the chickens roam, calling them back to the coop at dusk. Dry herbs and tie them in bundles. As fall progressed and herb plants began to fade, their flavors concentrated. The final harvest was taken. Sage, thyme, oregano, mint, parsley, and dozens of others were cut, tied into small bundles with twine, and hung to dry in attics, pantries, or any warm, dark, well-ventilated space. This wasn't just about cooking. Many herbs served medicinal purposes: mint for stomach troubles, sage for sore throats, and chamomile for sleep. Having a supply dried and ready meant not needing to visit doctors or buy remedies for common complaints. The bundles hung upside down, their stems secured and leaves pointing toward the floor. This position concentrated essential oils in the leaves during drying. Once brittle dry, the leaves were stripped, crumbled, and stored in glass jars away from light. These home-dried herbs had flavor and potency that store-bought versions couldn't match. They'd been harvested at peak, dried carefully, and appropriately stored. Soak bulbs in salt water. Before planting fall was bulb planting season, when tulips, daffodils, and other spring flowers went into the ground. But before planting, those who knew would prepare the bulbs with a simple treatment: a bath in salt water. The bulbs were soaked for a few hours in a solution of water and salt, then were planted immediately or allowed to dry briefly before going into the soil. This treatment served as both a fungicide and a pest deterrent. The salt killed fungal spores that could cause bulb rot, and it discouraged certain insects from attacking the bulbs underground. It was cheap, effective, and required no special products or chemicals. The concentration didn't need to be precise, just enough salt to make the water noticeably salty without being so strong it damaged the bulbs themselves. After soaking, the bulbs were planted at proper depths, pointy end up, in spots that would catch spring sun but avoid summer heat. By taking this extra step, families ensured their spring flowers would emerge reliably, brightening gardens after long winters. Keep a Victory Garden Journal paper might have been rationed, but serious gardeners found notebooks and filled them with observations through every growing season. These Victory Garden Journals were practical records. First and last frost dates, which varieties performed best, when each crop was planted and harvested, pest problems and what controlled them, weather patterns, and how they affected yield. This information accumulated year by year, creating personalized guides that no book could match. A gardener with 5 years of journals could look back and know that late-planted tomatoes always outperformed early ones in their particular yard, or that beans planted in the second week of May consistently produced the biggest harvests. They'd know which seed companies sold varieties that thrived in their conditions and which were disappointing. This knowledge was powerful. It let families optimize their gardens, making better decisions based on evidence rather than guesswork. Store pumpkins and squash on straw in cool basements winter squash, and pumpkins needed special treatment to last through winter. Simply piling them in a corner would result in soft spots and rot. Instead, storage was deliberate. Clean, dry straw was spread on basement floors or shelves in cool rooms. Pumpkins and squash were arranged on this straw, not touching each other, in single layers. The straw provided cushioning, preventing bruises, and allowed air circulation around each fruit. The cool temperature, ideally around 50 to 60 degrees, slowed respiration and decay without being cold enough to damage the flesh. Families would check stored squash weekly, removing any that showed soft spots before rot could spread to neighbors. Properly stored, these crops would last until spring, providing fresh food months after the garden had stopped producing. They were used in pies, soups, baked as side dishes, or even fed to livestock during lean times. The stems were left long on purpose. Cutting too close could create an opening for decay. Wrap young trees in burlap orchards, and young fruit trees needed fall protection, or they wouldn't survive to produce. The solution was simple. Strips of burlap wrapped around trunks from ground level up to the first branches. This wrapping served multiple purposes throughout winter. It prevented frost cracks, which occurred when sunny winter days warmed bark on the tree's south side, followed by rapid freezing at night. This expansion and contraction could split bark, creating wounds that invited disease and pests. The burlap moderated these temperature swings, keeping bark more consistent. It also deterred rabbits, mice, and deer from gnawing bark during winter, when other food was scarce. Young trees with thin bark were especially vulnerable to this damage, and a single winter of heavy browsing could kill a tree that had taken years to establish. The wrapping went on in late fall, secured with twine, but not so tight it would damage the growing tree. Bless or rest the garden. After harvest, when the last crop was pulled and fall tasks were complete, some families performed a quiet ritual that modern gardens have lost entirely. They'd stand at the garden's edge, often at sunset, and acknowledge the season's end. This might involve spoken thanks for the food produced, prayers for the soil's renewal over winter, or simply a moment of silence to recognize the partnership between humans and the earth. Some would scatter the last handful of saved seed as an offering or pour water on the center of the garden as a final blessing. Others would place a marker, a stone or stick, indicating that work was finished and rest had begun. This practice wasn't universal or standardized, varying across family traditions, cultures, and beliefs. But for those who did it, the moment held meaning beyond superstition. It was an acknowledgement that gardens were more than food production. They were relationships requiring effort, care, and respect. Which of these 1940s secrets would you bring back to your own garden? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to leave this video a hype and subscribe to this channel. See you in the next one.